Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast on the Monday after one of the more epic, nutty, bananas Game 82s in the history of the NBA. The play-in tournament begins tomorrow, Tuesday, with the Lakers against the Timberwolves and the Hawks against the Heat. The playoffs are right around the corner, and holy smokes, do we have a lot to talk about, Howard Beck. We could just do, I don't know, 4 hours on ranking the 100 most disappointing things that ever happened to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Do you want to just do that? Howard Beck, how are you, sir?
Did not utter the three most anticipated words. Your fans,
because I'm so distracted by Rudy Gobert punching Kyle Anderson on the bench, getting suspended. This has happened right before we were recording. He's suspended for one game, which just happens to be a play-in game. And by the way, I'm queuing up film last night of like, let me watch some Lakers Wolves regular season stuff to get a feel. Let me get my memory, jostled about how this matchup works. Okay, first play, LeBron AD pick and roll. Oh, wow, that's interesting. Jaden McDaniels is guarding LeBron and Rudy Gobert is guarding Anthony Davis, and they both punched people and or things, and they're both going to be out in this game, and it's a freaking disaster. And it's embarrassing for Rudy Gobert. It's embarrassing for the Wolves, who I just continue to not understand what in the hell they were doing with this trade. I said on TV right after it happened, I sit here in disbelief at everything they just gave up for Rudy Gobert, not knowing that Walker Kessler was going to be a surefire first-team all-rookie. He should be on pretty much every Rookie of the Year ballot. He is on mine. He came third on my Rookie of the Year ballot. We'll do awards later. And it's just like, I'm just aghast. And yet they won the game. They won the game. But yeah, it's, who the Pelicans, who lost that game, have to be sitting here thinking, we have a matchup at home against the Thunder. We're going to be favored in that matchup. We'll talk about that game later. And if we win that and the Wolves lose to the Lakers, like, we got to be feeling pretty good about life. What a mess.
An absolute mess. So it did hit me yesterday.
Naz Reid is injured. I'm sorry. I have to mention Naz Reid. They don't even have a backup center.
I believe Kyle Anderson is the backup center.
Luka Garza or Nathan Knight or Super Small or Cat plays all 48. And knowing Cat, he'll commit 4 fouls in the first 10 minutes of the game.
All I could think, Zach, as this was all unfolding last night, and knowing you and I were going to get together today, and great to see you, happy to be here again, is that you and I potted a few months ago, and when I was suggesting that the Lakers should be all in on this season and trade whatever they had to trade to reformat their roster to give themselves some sort of chance, and you went on a 5-minute rant about puncher's chance, and I all of a sudden realized you saw the future. You meant puncher's chance meant the Wolves punching each other and punching walls, because the Lakers now have more than a puncher's chance because of all the Wolves punching to actually be the 7th seed and then go into a first-round matchup against the Grizzlies, who, frankly, I think the Lakers could beat, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Well, I know. Look, I haven't. No, yes, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're getting ahead of ourselves.
I'm getting ahead of ourselves. It's my fault.
We'll talk about that another day. Go.
I just want you to reevaluate the whole puncher's chance thing in light of all of this. That's all. That's all I'm saying.
Hey, look. The Lakers have a chance to win the West. The Warriors have a chance to win the West. The Suns are my pick to win the West. The Clippers were my pick to win the West at the beginning of the season. They play the Suns. That doesn't seem great. We'll talk about that. The Nuggets can win the West. The Grizzlies can win the West. The Kings can win the West. Everybody can win the West. Is it possible the Mavericks might still be able to win the West? The Mavericks and the Wolves should have to play each other today in a sad bowl.
The humiliation bowl.
Just sadness. Just the winner gets the Brown participation trophy for existing in the season.
They should actually be forced to wear brown uniforms, like brown and tan, next season as penance for everything they've brought upon themselves and upon the NBA this season. No, listen, this is, I want to make this quick point before we get into this. You do this as well. We have all these conversations with people around the league, and you get a feel for things, and sometimes things surprise us, right? The last several weeks, I've been just asking random people when I'm bumping into them at games or talking on the phone, whatever, open-ended question, who's coming out of the West? And I get always these like long, awkward pauses. And then because the gears are turning, and then they'll say, they'll say it's probably, it's probably the Suns. I know Durant hasn't played much with them and they have injuries, blah, blah, but it's probably the Suns. Or occasionally it's, you know what? I really think the Warriors, once they get Wiggins back and they've got Peyton now, like it's going to be the Warriors. And then sometimes they say, you know what? If Paul George comes back in time, it's the Clippers. You know who nobody says? The top 3 teams in the Western Conference. Like I have yet to find somebody around the NBA who says.
I just did.
You just did. There are very few people who actually say, if I ask just who's coming out of the West, where their definitive answer is Denver, Memphis, Sacramento. I don't recall a time in my entire career covering this league where the top 3 teams in either of the conferences were not really considered the strongest favorites to come out of their conference. And instead, it's a Warriors team that has had a bizarre season, but we still have the outline of a championship team there, and they're getting guys back at the right time. And a Lakers team that, like, it's nobody is what they seem in a way. And we'll talk about the Clippers ending up having to deal with the Suns at some point, but like everybody in the lower part of the bracket, almost everybody feels viable. We don't know who the 7 and 8 seeds are yet, of course, but it's a very strange thing, Zach. Like we don't usually have this. And this is in a league where things always go to form. 1s and 2s do not lose in this league. Very, very rarely. Even 6s upsetting 3s is pretty rare. And yet this is a year where, look, I'm not predicting it, but if you and I are talking again in a few weeks and some combination of the top 3 seeds in the West didn't get past the first round, we're not going to be shocked. I like at least one of them could go down in the first round. In fact, I'll be surprised if one of them doesn't go down in the first round.
I'm going to make my first round picks later this week with David Thorpe, our annual 8x8, which is now 6x6 because of the play-in, because we just won't know the matchups in time. Yeah, look, I mean, I don't want to go quite there yet. I want to stick with Minnesota, which it's just, I mean, look, they could make the playoffs. They could make a little bit of noise in the playoffs, but it just feels very rickety there right now. The Gobert suspension, we got wind that was what they were looking at last night. I've had some pushback from people who think that's a little too aggressive given the stakes. They obviously disagree, and the team played well without him last night. I think it really hurts them against the Lakers. We can talk about that matchup in a second, but it's just, we'll see what they do this summer. I mean, we'll see. It was a trade that I was talking to people around the trade before it happened. When it got out that they were thinking about it. And I remember saying, are they sure they want to do this? And at that point, I was like, they might trade 2 first-round picks in a swap and something for Rudy Gobert. This is like unimaginable what they have given up for Rudy Gobert. And the blame is always going to go to the owners because that's what happens. Like, oh, new owner syndrome, A-Rod and Laurie. Tim Connolly has to wear this too. Tim Connolly, who knows more about basketball than I ever will, who built a fantastic team in Denver, who has a great track record that goes well before Denver, Washington, New Orleans, all of it. He has to wear this too, because part of the job of being the president of basketball operations is to tell the owners, no, if that's even what happened here, we don't know. I mean, It's just, I can feel this becoming one of those things that is going to be laid at the feet of ownership and ownership only. And it was a disaster when it happened, and it's an even worse disaster now. And there's just absolutely no way to sugarcoat it. They're going to try to extricate themselves from this somehow, some way, assuming they don't go on a run here.
All fair. And all that said, Zach, when anybody was critical of the trade at the time it happened, I felt like it had more to do with, first, the Gobert Karl Anthony Towns fit, number one. Number two, how much
that's it? Just that?
I don't know. I'm getting there. The first part was does this even make sense?
The meal was good except for the food. Everything else about the meal was great.
Line one of the critique was, is this the right move? Is this the right pairing? Line two was, oh, and by the way, they gave up probably way too much. But we never thought at that time, no matter how critical anybody was, fairly, that the reason it would actually backfire, and now listen, it's obviously been a rough ride the whole season, but that the thing we would be remembering most going into the offseason, which should be coming very soon, I suspect, for them, that the thing we'll remember most is not Gobert's awkward fit with Karl Anthony Towns. It's going to be that he punched Kyle Anderson in the chest in the middle of a really important game on the last day of the season, and then jeopardized, if not sunk, their ability to actually get out of the play-in and make the playoffs. So I'm just saying, in the grand scope of things, there was plenty to criticize from the start, or plenty to question from the start about the rationale behind the deal and the scope of the deal. And now we're talking about it through a lens that we could not have anticipated. And I'm not saying, that we knew that Rudy Gobert had some personality issues, right? We knew that people in Utah, there were chemistry issues throughout the last several years. How much of that was due to Rudy versus Donovan versus anybody else? You can try to parse all of that out. But I think what this is showing definitively, vividly yesterday on national TV is Rudy Gobert has some things that he needs to work out if he wants to be a really important teammate for more years in this league. And the Timberwolves now have to regret every part of this deal, including what it's done to their chemistry and including what it's done to their potential postseason. I cannot recall a more ill-timed outburst. I'm sure there have been some. I can think of Amari Stoudemire bloodying his hand and needing stitches for punching a fire extinguisher on his way out of a loss in Miami one year. But the literal 1-2 punch of Rudy Gobert and Jaden McDaniels in the middle of game 82, possibly sinking their play-in hopes against a Laker team that is much better than their record suggests. I don't know where you even begin if you're the Timberwolves. And I do want to say this real quick, because I was listening to NBA radio this morning, and Brian Scalabrine, obviously Scal knows this game and the ins and outs of team dynamics better than you and I do. He's lived it. But Scal was saying, because of the importance of it, he thought there should be no suspension. This is hours before the suspension was announced.
I had agents and others tell me the same thing.
And I'll just say this, and I respect where Scal is coming from, and I get it. And as a pragmatic matter, I totally get it. Right? Like the thing is to win, period. Do what you got to do. But if you as an organization, you're going to have any kind of values and principles, and we talk about culture all the time, if you're going to stand on that stuff, then you have to stand on it regardless of what the consequences are. And for Tim Connolly and that ownership group, I admire the fact that they're willing to do what I would say is the right thing. If it's the right thing to suspend him, if it were game 43, and they almost certainly would, then you can't abandon your principles and your standards out of some craven attempt to win a play-in game just so you can be cannon fodder in the first round anyway.
Let's talk about that game, because the Lakers are the other big winner here. Their play-in game now all of a sudden looks a whole lot different. Not that Gobert and McDaniels are all-stars this year. Neither of them was, but they're very good players, and it changes the defense totally of the game. I mean, Jaden McDaniels is the one who guards LeBron, and when LeBron sits, Jaden McDaniels guards D'Angelo Russell. That's how they matched up. They just played a couple weeks ago. The Lakers won in Minnesota. And I would assume that the Wolves start some variety of a smaller lineup with Rudy out, and my guess would be Conley, Anthony Edwards, Taurean Prince, Kyle Anderson, Karl Towns. And what that does is it gives you the flexibility to put Anthony Davis on Cat and Jared Vanderbilt on Anthony Edwards, which are their two favorite matchups that they like. They put Reeves on Anthony Edwards a lot, but they can put more size on him now because there's only one big guy that Anthony Davis has to guard. You don't have to put Jared Vanderbilt on Cat or worry about, who's guarding Rudy or whatever on the offensive glass. You can also get funky and put Anthony Davis on Kyle Anderson and let him roam, and put Vanderbilt on Cat and put Reeves on Ant, because they trust Reeves to do that matchup, to hold his own against Ant. It just gives the Lakers more defensive weapons for an already very good defensive team. And Minnesota now plays, 5 out with Cat, and the Lakers are going to be switching a lot of, at least some of the Ant Cat actions, given some of the personnel I just described. If it's Vanderbilt on Ant and AD on Cat, they can switch that here and there a little bit. LeBron will be around, hanging around, Kyle Anderson lurking around. it just puts a lot of pressure on someone like Mike Conley, who is going to have a small guy on him all the time, and will have to run more pick and roll with whether it's Ant or Cat to try and get mismatches, hunt D'Angelo Russell a little bit. It just removes so much of the size and versatility of Minnesota, and just gives them fewer. I mean, we talked about Naz Reid already. They just have fewer cards to play, and these single game matchups are about who can guard who can find a weakness, who can exploit it, and they just have more exploitable weaknesses now and less weapons. They do have Anthony Edwards and Karl Towns though, so you got a shot.
No, look, they still have a hell of a lot of offense out there, and just shot creation, and I don't think that the Lakers are going to roll them by any stretch. And look, back to the point of the Rudy Gobert trade critique in the first place, it was always a bit of an awkward fit, and they didn't even get a ton because Karl Anthony Towns missed so much time this season. They never really got enough time for those two to kind of figure out, if there was a way to figure out their partnership anyway. In some ways, maybe this simplifies things for them. I'm not saying it's a good thing to lose Gobert, and certainly not a good thing to lose Gobert and McDaniels together. It's putting them at quite a deficit, and this is just when the Lakers have really started, I think, to figure some things out and get on a roll. So it's going to hurt them, but I do wonder, in the alternate scenario where Gobert is playing and they're still trying to figure things out while going up against, LeBron and Anthony Davis in tandem, whether they would have had an uphill battle regardless. At a certain point, you just need the bodies, and especially defensive bodies. And so they've certainly made the Lakers' lives a lot easier. I'll be stunned if the Lakers don't win that game. I think the Lakers will be stunned if they don't win that game. But yeah, and it's, I feel for the Timberwolves fan base and for that franchise on some level. Like I gave this, I made this point somewhere last summer when the trade happened, as might have been my overzealousness to play devil's advocate in the wake of all of the backlash they were getting. That the one thing I could say for it is that I admired the ambition, right? I admired the swing for the fences. Was it too big of a swing? Did they send out too many picks? Did they send out too many players? Was it the right gamble? Arguably not, but I admired the ambition there. And also it's reductive to say, well, we're a team with some great offensive weapons and we just need somebody to turn us into a top 10 defense. And Rudy Gobert is a walking top 10 defense. That's what we always said when he was in Utah. Like, I get it in the abstract. I got it in the abstract. I understood it. But what a terrible way for this to all go down. And if they're out as I suspect, I assume you do too. Well,
we'll see.
We'll see. Well, actually, they get a second chance, right? If they lose to the Lakers, they get a second chance to beat the winner of Pelicans-Thunder, and they host that game. So, and Gobert will be back for that game, but Jaden McDaniels sadly will not.
And Slow-Mo, the agitator. Well, I wouldn't say he was an agitator, but he called Rudy some names, and that's what Kyle Anderson does. He's in your face. He'll tell you like it is, right to your face.
It's, what's really fascinating about that? Within the last couple of days, there were actually, and some people put some quotes out, and I apologize for not remembering who had put them out, but it was, Rudy Gobert complimenting within the last couple of days for a story that I can't remember if it came out yet because somebody just tweeted the quote like, "Hey, I was working on this story." Rudy Gobert complimenting how Kyle Anderson is this very direct, blunt voice and leader for them. And Kyle Anderson has taken on this really important role. And, look, there's always a fine line between teammates, between friends for that matter, when you're calling somebody out, the line that you can't cross and you're not sure where it might be. And maybe it's just a matter of timing. Maybe Rudy Gobert's just in a bad way at that moment. But a team that, has said otherwise, we really appreciate Kyle Anderson's candor and his bluntness and his leadership. And in that moment, he crossed a line perhaps, and it backfired. It's
well, and Rudy was playing with back spasms or through back spasms last night, which is, I don't know how serious they were, but they were there. So I'm sure he took extra offense at having, his toughness questioned or whatever you want to say what Kyle said. And Kyle will step in now and probably guard LeBron right from the jump, and he's capable of that. That probably means Cat has to guard Anthony Davis instead of hiding out on Vanderbilt somewhere because they just don't have enough big guys. Like, you can't put Taurean Prince on Anthony Davis. I don't think you could put Kyle Anderson on Anthony Davis and put Taurean Prince on LeBron. That seems bad too. If Taurean Prince even starts, the trickle down starts to get a little troubling. And the Lakers at home should win. Their starters have been totally dominant. The wild card for the Lakers to me is always Vanderbilt. And like, when the spacing gets a little tight, do they have enough answers off the bench? They just need one or two guys off the bench to come in and make shots. And if it's Hachimura, that's great. That means you can stay bigger and have Hachimura guard some of these bigger wings that LeBron maybe doesn't want to guard. If it's small, then you have Schroeder or you have Beasley, who kind of is a wild card for them. And it's just, it's LeBron at home with one game to beat one team that doesn't give you a whole lot of reasons to have faith in its sort of late game composure. And it's a team that fouls the bejesus out of everybody and does not get a lot of free throws. And as has been well documented, the Lakers are dominating the free throw game. So it's like they're coming up to this game ahead 10-0 at home from opening tip. So the one thing that Gobert being out of the lineup does for the Wolves is their transition defense is just so bad when they have both the big guys on the floor, which is typical of very big teams. They're just too slow to pivot from one side to the other. So you can't let the Lakers and LeBron get too many freight train buckets or you're just going to lose. But boy, oh boy. It's just, what can you say? What else can you say? Let's move on to topic number 2 on my ledger for today. The Clippers, my preseason pick to make the finals, and I will continue to beat myself with a cudgel over that one because it does not look like it's going to come through with Paul George's availability for this series against the Phoenix Suns up in the air. And boy, oh boy, will they miss Paul George in a series where they have to guard Chris Paul and more pointedly Devin Booker and more pointedly than that, Kevin Durant. And the Suns have still not lost with Kevin Durant on the floor. None of the wins have been like super duper convincing, but their big four is plus a lot in not very many minutes and looks totally dominant. And Kawhi Leonard, I don't know if you know this, Howard, even Kawhi Leonard can only guard one person at a time. Now, he can kind of guard like 1.5 people at a time when he goes into full-on sharktopus mode and he's just snatching the ball out of the air. But if it's Durant, if he's got to guard Durant, and I would suspect they'll try Batum and just see if Batum can survive. But if he's got to guard Durant, that's just a lot to do, man. And we saw him do it against Luka for a couple of games. The last time the Clippers tried to finagle with seeding in the playoffs a couple of years ago. But I don't want to talk about that series yet because I'm still doing my work on that. There was a whole kerfuffle yesterday on NBA Twitter. And this was one of the rare days I was paying attention to NBA Twitter because it's like I had a bunch of games going in the background. I don't have to dig too deep into the X's and O's of these games. It's just the results that matter. So let's have some fun about whether the Clippers should have tanked their game on purpose against Phoenix in hopes of finishing below the Warriors and landing in 6th, which would have depended on the outcome of the Timberwolves New Orleans game. Had New Orleans won that game and the Clippers lost and the Warriors lost, the Clippers would have dropped into 7th in the play-in tournament and played, I don't know who, my brain is broken right now, and been in the play-in. Now they won, and the games were going on at exactly the same time. There was even suggestions that Ty Lue should have come up with a Jason Kidd-esque plan to spill something on the floor, delay the game, maybe pay. I guess if the game was in Phoenix, what was I going to say? Chuck the Condor, the stupidest mascot in the NBA, could come out and cause a scene on the floor just so they could get the outcome of the other game known. And it did raise this question that I talked about with Kevin Pelton last week about should they have just knowing that there was some chance Minnesota would win, which they did, and knowing that either way your win outcome is facing this Phoenix team, should they have just said, you know what, we'll lose, and we'll pay the price. If the price is 7, we'll pay the price. They obviously chose not to. I said on Friday with Pelton, they will not do that. No team is going to risk the play-in, let alone a team that lost twice in the play-in last year. But, Bob Voulgaris, who's a very smart guy, kind of made the mathematical argument. Other people have made this argument too, that if you just sort of assign X probability to beating Phoenix in the first round, and then X probability versus, X probability of winning the play-in versus X probability of winning, blah, blah, blah. Like, the math is kind of even-ish in theory. What did you think?
I think people are overthinking it. I want to make this quick point, by the way, on this subject, because it also pulls in the Mavericks situation, which I know you're going to talk about with MacMahon later in the pod. I love that we got the play-in. I think the play-in has done a whole lot to make the last part of the regular season much livelier, more engaging. The stakes are great. I mean, listen, there was things at stake. We had a bunch of, dud games yesterday with basically a combination of G League rosters, and they look like preseason games, but we also had a bunch of games with stakes right down to the last game that was played. And that happens in large part because of the play-in. But what the play-in has done to kind of warp our sensibilities in a way is that in a world where it's still the 1 through 8, the Clippers could have just done that, right? The Clippers could have said, screw it. We'd rather, if we lose and we end up 7th instead of 6th, that's fine, but better than being 5th and having to deal with the Suns. And you're still assured of a playoff spot. In the Mavericks case, the awkwardness and humiliation and everything else that they did and said that has gotten them in hot water and now has gotten an investigation.
Happy Slovenian night. Hope you didn't pay too much for your plane tickets across the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh my. But in a world where it's still just the 1 through 8, the Mavericks would have already been dead in the water, and they could have just let go of the rope weeks ago. And so it's just interesting to remember that not so long ago we had just a 1 through 8, and it would have simplified some of these decisions. And in that case, if the Clippers want to tempt fate, tempt the basketball gods, whoever, by messing around on the last day and losing a game that they could have won because they'd rather avoid a matchup in the 4-5 slot, fine. But in this case, Zach, all respect to Bob Voulgaris and others who were arguing this point, I don't think you mess around. The play-in is at most 2 games. And, God forbid, Kawhi gets in foul trouble.
I do think that's key in Bob and others' argument, is that the Clippers would not have fallen into the single elimination part of the play-in. They would have had 2 chances to win, which is a massive, massive difference.
It is a massive difference, but it's still the case where one bad game, you win the first one, fine, you're in. You lose the first one because something went wrong, and now you are win or go home in the second one. You're taking an awful risk. I'd rather just assure myself of being in the playoffs, having the whole week off, by the way, or at least not having games to play, and being that much fresher, especially for a team that's a veteran team that is always banged up and where your 2 stars are always hurt and they're still waiting on Paul George. Don't add extra games that you don't have to play if you can avoid it. So I thought they did the right thing. And the idea that Ty Lue was supposed to be scoreboard watching, what's he going to do? Yank all his guys off the court in a hurry at the last second and go, no, wait, we want to lose. How would that have looked in the wake of the NBA just announcing an investigation of the Mavericks for losing intentionally? You're winning a game with 5 minutes left, you yank everybody?
That's part of the deal. Remember, 2 years ago, I've told this story on this podcast before. Someone within the Clippers was telling me about how they had kind of finagled their way to play the Mavs, and I think what was the 4 or 5 series that year. And this person said, "Yeah, we think this is like a 5-game series for us." And I said, "Oh boy, that dude over there in Dallas, yeah, I know he likes to have a good time off the court. Maybe he's not in the best shape. Maybe he whines to the refs all the time, despite what Mark Cuban might tell you in very profane terms. That dude's a killer. You don't want any part of him." And he almost took him out. Look, again, it would have been double elimination for the Clippers, not single elimination, right? Still, it's just 2 games. You lose 2 games. They lived this last year. Now, Paul George, missed the last game with COVID, or I believe it was COVID. I should probably check that, but I believe so. And there is some irony in some, not too much, but some, because again, I understand it would have been double elimination, but in suggesting that a team that is trying its damnedest, all out urgency to beat Saban Lee and Darius Baisley and damn near can't do it, suggesting that that team about to perhaps lose a single one, anything can happen game to Saban Lee and Darius Baisley and Terrence Ross tank its way into more single-ish elimination circumstances. There's a little bit of irony to that. So I understand why the Clippers did what they did. They do now land in what is a very tough matchup for them and for anybody else, and a matchup that just screams Paul George, like pretty much any matchup would, but particularly when you're trying to slow down those dudes. But I just don't know, short of getting lucky and having the NBA tip you 2 hours earlier, which is not going to happen for a West game. Two West games are going to tip at the same time at the end. I just don't know what you're supposed to do, especially when you're not at home and you can't have Chuck the Condor run out or Steve Ballmer perform some sort of dance routine between quarters. And I don't know. I don't know what you're supposed to do.
Where was it? Was it Phoenix? Where was it over the last two? Everything's such a freaking blur. Somebody had like a speaker hanging by a thread or something, didn't they? And had to like pause the game to take care of something that was falling off of a scoreboard.
Dude, every time I go to a game, there's a moment pre-game where I'm sitting talking to a scout or something, and I look up at the Jumbotron, and the thought crosses my mind like, man, I hope that thing doesn't fall. It's just hanging there. It seems so precarious.
It really does. I would make this point too, though. And like I get it, especially if you're the Clippers, right? You brought together Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. You sent out Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and a bazillion picks, and you made this amazing 2-part move 4 years ago now. And you haven't had anything to show for it. And everybody's talking about it's all going to have been a failure. It's all going to have been for naught. And so the last thing you want is to run into Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, Chris Paul in the first round and possibly be a first round and out. I would just say in general, if you don't, I know you want to buy and you also want to buy yourself time to get Paul George back. But whether you lose in the first round, the second round, if you made the conference finals, whatever, if you eventually have to deal with this team and you can't beat them, then you can't beat them. And your playoff run is a failure anyway. I know the optics are bad when you lose in the first round, especially when you have invested so heavily in 2 stars that were supposed to make you title contenders. I get all that. But there's a certain part of this too, where again, if you're weighing this whole, like, we're taking a chance, we may have to go through the play and you got to play who you got to play, right? Like eventually you got to beat good teams to advance in the playoffs. So you either have confidence you can do it or you don't. And yesterday was alarming, by the way, though, that it took that much effort for them to put away the third string Suns was a bad thing.
Yeah, it happens. It's one game. It happens. And credit Russell Westbrook too. Russell Westbrook and Kawhi carried him over the finish line. Russ with hustle play after hustle play. I was wrong about his impact on the Clippers, at least so far. And they pulled it out, and that happens. There's also this school of thought that you hear. You know, Bill Simmons has been big on this. Like, I think it was Bill Simmons. Apologies if not. But how the idea that I'd rather play the Suns sooner rather than later, while Durant is still figuring out his fit with the team and before they get a groove. I get that, and you hear that every once in a while. And yes, it is unprecedented. Like it's borderline unprecedented for a team to make a trade of that magnitude and win the title. So there is obviously, even with Durant, there will be some fit-in stylistic hiccups, whatever. I don't expect them to be big, but history suggests there will be. I'm still always of the school of thought, like, I'd rather put it off as long as possible. I'd rather, if I can finagle the brackets so that I can avoid the team that I really want to avoid, it just gives more time for bad stuff to happen to their team. And maybe bad stuff will happen to my team in the interim, like my best player will sprain an ankle, whatever. I'm always, there's no right answer, but I would always prefer, like, let's kick that can down the road and just, like, maybe we catch lightning in a bottle. Maybe someone punches someone on the sidelines on their team, or punches the wall, or punches a fire extinguisher, or punches a Gatorade cooler, or whatever. Okay, we're going to preview Thunder Pelicans, which should not be forgotten. But before we do that, I want to take a detour into awards ballots. It is 3:37 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Monday, April 10th, my parents' anniversary. Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad. I love you.
Happy anniversary.
And ballots are due in 2 hours and 22 minutes. Mine is in. It is in. I have washed my hands of it. I don't want to see it again. I've already forgotten parts of it, but it is in. It is filed. Is your ballot in, Beck?
My ballot is not in.
The PR people are going to yell at you if you don't get that damn ballot in.
Mark Broussard was texting me literally minutes before you and I signed into Zoom. I've promised him it will be in by about 5:59 Eastern time. They're due at 6.
Give me your 2 toughest decisions, and we'll see if we could talk it through, and I will tell you what I did in these circumstances.
I will say it's not in yet, but I've completed everything except for All NBA, and I think I'm actually down to just the forwards on All NBA before you and I signed on, and I will finish it up when we sign off. Mark Broussard, I promise you these will be filed on time. I believe I'm perennially one of the last to file. I kind of take it as a point of pride now. So MVP was tough. Duh. We all know that. We've all argued and discussed it literally. I was going to say literally to death, but that's not actually true. I'm still alive. It feels like we've argued it to death. It has been deathly painful, the arguments. But All NBA it's always tough. There's always too many bodies. That's fine. That's why it's an honor. I don't mind hard cuts. What's made it more difficult this year is that now more than ever in this era, and I know the NBA is trying to take care of this in the CBA with minimum games and all this stuff, and I don't think it's fine. And maybe it'll simplify my life. I like that we have the judgment, that we can make the judgment. But in other years, Zach, there were some obvious ones where it's like I can just cross a line through this guy because it's too few games, and I can elevate this other person, or I can recognize this other person. The problem this year is so many guys who should be worthwhile, who are among the best at their position and who had phenomenal seasons when they were actually played so few games. And I've always been one who believes that it's okay to have the LeBron James exception or the Steph Curry exception. They are all-time greats. And you and I have discussed this before. And I know you've talked about this before too. Sometimes it's just, why? Because he's Steph freaking Curry or because he's LeBron freaking James.
Well,
this was tough on that week.
Both of those players are on my All NBA teams. I won't say exactly where they're, but they're both on. LeBron, there's the 3 all-time forwards in Kawhi, KD, and LeBron who played fewer games than ideally you would like. LeBron played the most games and significantly the most minutes of those 3.
Yes.
Curry is Curry, and I have both Curry and Lillard on my All NBA teams. Lillard actually in 58 games played a ton of minutes, like almost 2,100 something minutes. Curry played, I think, 1950 or something like that. And the toughest cut after that, in terms of the guys who had played like the 50 something games for me, was Devin Booker at 53 games, and I think about 150 fewer minutes than Curry. And I just concluded like he just wasn't quite as good as Curry and Lillard, who played more minutes and Dame significantly so, and were just outrageously like those 2 guys are all-time great players who played at pretty much peak levels for them. So they are both on my among my 6 All NBA guards. And Devin Booker, apologies to Devin Booker, who played at an All NBA level, did not make it on my ballot.
No, as of right now. I don't think subject to change. I'm pretty set on these. I do have Curry and Lillard both. I do not have Booker, and I'm not making apologies for it because Steph is Steph and Dame is Dame, and even if they only played a few more games than Booker, it's a few games, and those guys were playing at an outstanding level, and they are absolute all-time greats, and they deserve a little bit more consideration. They have absolutely earned that. So I had no problem there. LeBron is one I was still wrestling with. And the thing is, when you start wrestling with whether to put LeBron there still, there's no Anthony Davis exception. He's not at LeBron's level, historically speaking, or otherwise. But, games played, it's comparable, LeBron and AD, and AD's been really, really important to the Lakers and has had a pretty fantastic season.
Well, here's AD's problem. He's a center. And I know he's listed at forward and center, but that's bogus, and it's cheating to list him as a forward. Just like Domantas Sabonis is a center, Jokic is a center, Embiid is a center. So AD, to me, I thought about sliding. I'm not in love with my 13 forwards. And the 2 guys I thought about sliding in just because I thought they were phenomenal when they played this season for 13 forward were Anthony Davis, and ultimately I decided, no, he's a center and he's not going to make my 3 All-NBA teams. The All-NBA centers are Embiid, Jokic, and Sabonis.
Agreed.
For me. And Jaren Jackson Jr. And I just decided I just don't think he's quite played enough minutes compared to these other guys who are all massive, 25 and up scorers. And I love Jaren Jackson Jr. and I can talk about him later, but I couldn't get there with AD.
No, and I did not either, and I won't, and I also don't want to shoehorn guys. As long as the NBA is still sending us ballots, and they still are, at least now, with 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a center on each team, I'm going to go by where those guys played the most. And some guard forward types do swing back and forth. That's a little bit different, but Sabonis has played nearly entirely at center, and Anthony Davis has played nearly entirely at center. And I'm not going to mess around there. I'm not going to do the thing where people want to put Jokic and Embiid on the same first team. It's stop.
I didn't do that. I didn't do that for Embiid, and I'm not going to do it for Jokic, which is my way of saying I'm not going to reveal all my award choices here because my .com editors will be mad. I voted 2023 MVP Joel Embiid, and I went Embiid, Jokic, Giannis, Tatum, Donovan Mitchell. That's my MVP ballot. Luka fell off of it toward the end of the season. I just don't think you can be on a team that finishes 11th and crack the top 5 in MVP. There were other guys in consideration for that 5th spot. We've talked a lot about the MVP. I articulated the case for Joel Embiid last week with Kevin Pelton. I thought that was a pretty clear wink to where I was leaning. So I don't really need to articulate that case. I'm comfortable with the vote. I think the last 5 weeks has just been all Embiid for various reasons that, again, I've already kind of articulated. I know the, not excuses, but I know the reality of Denver's situation, having locked in the number 1 seed. But I voted Embiid MVP in the end, and I think he's deserving, and I think he is going to win, and maybe easily.
I believe our ballots are identical, so I guess that's my way of confirming who I voted for. The Luka thing was interesting, by the way. And everybody's talked about Embiid, Jokic ad nauseum, so I don't even need to go there. But my ballot, I think, is exactly the same as yours. And I had Mitchell in that 5th slot after, like Luka was on my theoretical MVP ballot in some spot all year. Every time Bontemps called up for the straw poll or texted for the straw poll, I think I had Luka there somewhere. But the ghastly finish to their season is one thing. I also ended up looking this up because, we have a kind of a sliding scale, right? Winning historically, with a couple of notable exceptions, and you know how I feel about the wins part of MVP. Winning has historically been a really, really big part of this, more so at the top of the ballot than the bottom. And 4 and 5 is where you kind of reward other people who might have had outstanding seasons, but maybe they weren't quite as outstanding or their team wasn't quite as. But I was curious, were there even any top 5 finishers in the MVP race in recent years from a losing team? And I didn't go back all the way because I could have been here forever, but I went back a good 15 years and I did not find a single top 5 finisher in the MVP from a losing team in the last 15 seasons. And
I was going to guess maybe Kevin Love from the 2012 Wolves when they would go 40 and 42 every year, and they'd be +8 with Kevin Love on the floor and minus 45,000 with Kevin Love on the bench, but not even him, huh?
I went back.
They were over 500 some of those years too. They were over 500, even if he cracked.
I don't think he did crack. So I went back to 07, 08 or somewhere in that range, and I did not find anybody from a losing team. And so I thought, you know what, that's good enough for me to Luka's incredible. He's a phenomenal player. If you're starting a team tomorrow, he's one of the first picks you're taking. But that was just such a ghastly, humiliating end to their season. And they if you can't even make the play-in, you're not in the MVP discussion anymore. I'm sorry.
The last thing I'll say on MVP that I think I neglected to say last week in making the case for Embiid is he actually leads Jokic in a couple of the advanced stats this year and is much closer in others than he's ever been before. The last 2 years, 2 things that Jokic said going for him is, number 1, a substantial minutes advantage. Doesn't have that this year. And number 2, all of the advanced stats, and I'm not dumb. I know that you can't look at any one of them and say, that one is ironclad, that one is right. I don't have to think anymore and use my brain for critical thinking because Schnorp tells me that this guy's number 1 and that guy's number 2. No, but when 15 Schnorps all tell you the same thing, you have to at least acknowledge their existence and listen to them, not listen to them, but acknowledge their viewpoint on things, and their viewpoint is different this year. Give me one individual award. Forget the all NBA, all defense, all rookie. One of the 6 individual awards that you fretted over the most.
Of the individual awards that I fretted over the most, I'm scrolling back through. Most improved is always difficult. But I'm fine with where I went there. 6-man wasn't all that big of a deal. I don't know that I don't think I struggled with the top line on any of these. I struggled with, like, on the coach of the year ballot. I think Mike Brown might win unanimously at this stage, but I was struggling with the 2, 3. There's always like 6, 7, 8 coaches that are worthy of recognition. And I really wanted to get Michael Malone on there. And at the last minute, I swerved. So Michael Malone's my 4th place on a 3-man ballot.
He has done an incredible job. I give him some love. He's been on my ballot before, and I give him some love in my honorable mentions this year. There are 2 ways you can look at the Nuggets, right? Well, not 2. I find the last 5 weeks of Nuggets basketball somewhat troubling. I cannot just dismiss this as this team in early March whooped Memphis, locked up the number 1 seed for all intents and purposes, and has been snoozing through the remainder of the season. There's some snoozing going on. There's a chance that Denver comes out in the first round of the playoffs just like a house on fire, just whipping the ball around, cutting, dunking, talking trash, and like, oh, that gear was sitting here. I'm slightly worried. I'm slightly worried about the Nuggets, and I'm not saying that that's a reason to not vote Michael Malone. It's just you jogged my memory of a Nuggets thought that I wanted to get across. I voted for Mike Brown.
And the thing is, over the last couple of years, as people have weighed Jokic's MVP candidacy, and a lot of the times it's been strengthened by the fact, well, he's missing Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr., or he's, it's the lackluster supporting cast. It's all the volatility they've had around him. And, it speaks well of Jokic that he has been able to elevate them. It also speaks well of the coach who has kept this team on track and found good combinations, even when he didn't have good options. And I just think his voice there too, like, that's a team that can be kind of, I don't know what the right word is. You take on the personality sometimes of your best player, right? And Jokic is laid back isn't even the right word, but there's a certain, like, you don't feel that same intensity off of him as you feel off of other dominant players in this league. Sometimes it's a different kind of style that he plays, even just his demeanor on the court. But Malone is like fire and brimstone sometimes, and I think they need it. Like, I think he's the right coach to try to keep the fire lit there sometimes, and so I think that's an aspect of it too. BJ Bickerstaff ended up my number 2, and Mark Dagnall, whose last name I never feel like I'm pronouncing correctly, and it has a lot of consonants and vowels in strange places, and looks like it should be pronounced with some kind of French accent that I cannot pull off, was my number 3.
I'll have the beef Dagenol, please. The beef Dagenol.
Something like
with
that.
A little au jus. That's my exact coach of the year ballot. The 2 that I struggled with most individually, and I will just talk very briefly: rookie of the year and defensive player of the year. Rookie of the year is the one I'll say who I voted for. Last 50-something games of the season, Jalen Williams, 15.5 points a game, way better shooting than Paolo Banchero. Last 50-something games of the season, Paolo Banchero, 19 points a game, way worse shooting, like 40%, 30%, compared to 50%, 40% than Jalen Williams. And so you ask yourself, 53 games, that's like 3.5 points. Like, that's all? You're going to vote for Paolo Banchero because of 3.5 points? That's it? I ended up voting for Paolo Banchero because obviously you cannot dismiss the first 25 or 30 games in which he was not dominant, but really, really good. And something that a couple of coaches said to me as I was thinking about this, something I'm aware of, but I haven't lived it. And so I don't know how it feels, but they said, what Jalen Williams did in the last 50 games, absolutely tremendous. The guy looks like he's going to be a star. You are correct to be really, really high on him. You are almost correct to just vote him rookie of the year, which I really came close to doing. But you can't underestimate the physical toll those first 30 games took on Banchero, a rookie, working as the number one option and looking really, really good. And conversely, the toll they did not take on Jalen Williams, who was probably fresher by game 40 and game 50 than Paolo Banchero was, having not had to. In fact, Jalen Williams came off the bench for the first 15, 20 games of the season. So I voted Banchero. And my ultimate litmus test was, all right, just Nerf gun to the head. In 5 years, which of these guys is most likely to be like an all-NBA superstar? I think it's still Banchero, and I think that we'll remember that from his rookie year, the moments where he showed that. So that was one I deliberated really hard on. And when I first filled it out, I had Jalen Williams, and I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, but I ended up at Banchero, and actually I feel okay about it.
Yeah, I went Banchero, Williams, and Kessler in that order. So it's funny because we talk ourselves out of things sometimes over time, because I think we have gotten smarter about how to process all this over the years. In the age of analytics and social media and more discussion of this, we have, I think, all tried to not be too beholden to just the raw numbers. Like, okay, who's the rookie of the year? It's whoever scored, 20, 25 points a game. Whoever was the leading scorer among the rookies is the rookie of the year. Who's the sixth man of the year? It's whoever's the highest score. Like, and the pushback in this era has been, it's more to the game than just scoring. And by the way, the efficiency matters. And, usually it's, especially with rookie of the year, high pick, bad team, gets a lot of shots. Okay. You don't want to be that reductive, and you don't want to reward a guy just for taking a lot of shots, but that's not really what Banchero did. But I also do think, in defense of kind of the older model of this, of what the rookie of the year is, he had the entire franchise on his shoulders. Like, yeah, more shots. Yeah, more opportunity. Yeah, more responsibility too.
I even push back on that a little bit, because Franz Wagner and Wendell Carter Jr. and Markelle Fultz are not like dopes. Those guys are good players. It's not like he's out there just like, I got to take 35 shots a game. Even that gave me pause.
He's not on a barren team by any stretch. But when you occupy that position, when you've been drafted in that position, there is something that comes with that. There is an extra pressure and a responsibility with it. Besides, and also, look, he played his ass off in a variety of ways. He wasn't just out there as some like volume shooter, right? So that's where you don't want to get too caught up in the numbers. If a guy is just
to your point, this is going to sound dumb. He looks the part, and by that I mean he's physical, he's smart, he's agile, and he's incredibly skilled. Skilled enough to walk in the league and on one possession run an inverted pick and roll and score. On the next possession, screen in a traditional pick and roll and score, or make a read on the fly, spraying the ball out to shooters. On the next possession, facilitate from the elbow. Like, the guy can do everything on offense already. And so he got my vote. Okay, can we do some mini previews?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad we didn't have to go too deep on MVP, because I think we're all sick of it by now. And I did, if people that haven't seen it yet, I did write a good 2,000 words last week for GQ.com on the idea of voter fatigue, which I am saying is not really a thing. And it kind of maybe is like a tiny, tiny bit, but it's mostly because of Karl Malone 1,000 years ago. And I don't think it's applying to this year. And if Jokic doesn't win it, you blame it on whatever else you want. It's not going to be because of voter fatigue.
Again, I made the case last week. If you want to hear the case, you can listen to that, or you can read my column that comes out in a couple of days. Mini preview: Thunder Pelicans, the 9-10 game in New Orleans. Are the Pelicans going to do this again, where they come from the play-in graveyard and roar their way into the playoffs? I think this is going to be a fun game. We have two fantastic defensive matchups, Howard Beck. When Oklahoma City has the ball, the slithery, ungraspable, like trying to catch a fish with your bare hands, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander will be guarded by Herb Jones. Woo! When the Pelicans have the ball, Brandon Ingram will be guarded by Lou Dort. And there's going to be a lot of Shai and B.I. hunting for matchups that they like. For Shai, I think that's going to be, let's see what we can get poking at Jonas Valanciunas a little bit in the pick and roll. Can I get some good mid-range jumpers? Can I get big Jalen Williams, the other Jalen Williams, some threes? And some of these games come down to, like, does big Jalen Williams have a random 4 of 6 game from threes? Well, one game. It's one game. Some of it will come down to, you watch the film SGA likes to find CJ McCollum and say, where's CJ McCollum? He's the littlest guy. You got all these other switchy dudes, your Trey Murphys, your Herbs, your Larry Nance's if he's at center. I don't like those guys. Give me CJ McCollum. And BI is going to do the same thing. He likes Isaiah Joe. He likes I think they should make Shea work on defense, go at him a little bit. These teams don't shoot threes very well, so the spacing is going to get cramped. They both get to the rim a lot. My favorite stat of this game is that the Pelicans have the worst field goal percentage allowed at the rim on defense this year, i.e. teams shoot like a gazillion % against them at the rim. And the Thunder, who get to the rim a lot, have the worst field goal percentage at the rim on offense. So it's the immovable object against the, what is it? I don't know, whatever.
Unstoppable force,
whatever the other thing is, of rim incompetence.
Is that
facing off each other?
Force?
I am picking the Pelicans to win this game at home. I think they're deeper and fresher. The Thunder are really kind of, with Holmgren out all year, Muscala traded, and Kenrich Williams, who would be super useful for them in this game as a small ball 5. They're kind of like a threadbare team. And they're even just saying, like, to hell with it, let's just put our five best guys on the floor, even though they're all guards, which is Giddey, Shea, Jalen Williams, Dort, and Isaiah Joe off the bench, and let's just let it fly. I'm going to pick the Pelicans to win this one.
I think that's right. I feel like these play-ins they could be kind of just a coin toss in some respect, but the Pelicans have. I haven't gone and looked at the numbers for playoff experience deficit here, but CJ McCollum's been in a bunch of playoff games, and
he won a game 7 in Denver, man. When Dame was out of gas, CJ McCollum dragged him across the finish line for the Blazers.
And there's a lot of youth on this team too, but I mean, you've got veterans in Ingram and Valanciunas and guys who have been around a bit. The Thunder are still pretty young. Is there like a single, I'm looking outside of like Dario Saric? Is there anybody with
he's been their backup 5 lately, and he's been actually okay. But by the way, if the other thing you mentioned, Valanciunas, if I'm New Orleans, I'm feeding him the ball early, making Jalen Williams guard him in the post, making Dario Saric guard him in the post, or you got a front and we got to get shots elsewhere. And Herb Jones is on one right now shooting threes. I think the Pelicans are going to win and end a wonderful season for the Thunder. But what the hell do I know, Howard Beck? It's just one game. But we've got those matchups are fun. Herb Jones against Shea and Dort against BI, and those have been the primary matchups in these games. That's fun.
I like it. It's fun. Once again, the play-in is fantastic, and the stakes. Listen, I understood neither of these teams are having their years or their lives made or broken on one play-in game, but sudden death is fun, and
yeah, I mean, obviously there's one big missing character here other than Chet Holmgren, and that's Zion. And I keep saying this on TV, like, Zion has played 114 games in 4 years. 114 in 4 years, including playoffs, which he has played none. At what point is this just a crisis for the Pelicans? At what point is this endemic to the experience of having him on your team? And I don't mean that default him. It just is what it is. He doesn't play. And it's hard to build a team around someone who doesn't play. When he plays, he is absolutely worthy of being someone you build a team around. He's that good. He's Lawrence Taylor mixed with Shaq. You can't keep him away from the rim. We keep getting these updates, and every update's the same, like ramping up. We're going to give you further updates later. Not ready to play yet. I was like, at what point? Perk has suggested they should try to trade him. I get why he's saying that. It just would be an all-time low kind of to trade him at. But like, I do think we're reaching the point where the Pelicans need to have a hard conversation with themselves, with Zion, with everybody on the team, and be like, what do we do here? Like, how do we plan our next 4 years at this point?
It's funny because there's a couple of these quandaries around the league, right? Like the Mavericks have this massive quandary, I think, with Kyrie Irving having, traded away all these assets to get him. And if he walks, great, you've got cap room, but like you've got nothing around Luka. But if you do re-sign him, depending on how long, like there's a lot of risk that comes with re-signing. Like that's a quandary. The Zion quandary is the single biggest quandary, I think, of any team with star player in the NBA and maybe of the last 10 or 15 years, because yeah, his ceiling is perennial MVP candidate, and his floor or his basement is what they've experienced for the last 4 years, where he's just never healthy for any length of time. And he's already maxed out, super maxed out, mega maxed, turbo maxed, whatever. He's got making every dollar you can possibly make in the NBA system. And even if you like, I could make the theoretical argument, I guess Perk has, I missed that. The theoretical argument to trade him, I would get, because you've got a cornerstone all-star in Brandon Ingram, and a guy who flirts with all-star caliber play in CJ McCollum, and a bunch of really good young players. And if you could trade Zion for anywhere near his value, you'd get a bunch of other cool stuff to put around those two players, and you'd be in great shape, and you'd have a lot more reliability in your core. But yeah, I don't know what anybody would give up for Zion, right? Like that'd be a really interesting hypothetical to start throwing at GMs right now is, what if he were available? What would you be willing to give up? And I'm not sure there's a whole lot that anybody would.
I'm not ready to go there yet.
Yeah.
Just not. Let's do a quick preview of Heat-Hawks. Do you have any Heat-Hawks thoughts other than the Heat beat the hell out of the Hawks almost every goddamn time they play?
Listen, this is a mercy killing. The Heat should just put the Hawks out of their misery and let them go into their offseason and deal with their quandaries. Because if I'm doing the all NBA, all quandary list, Trae Young is creeping up the standings.
I got a weird gut feeling, Howard Beck.
Oh?
I got a weird gut feeling. I don't like it.
Hawks in the upset?
I don't like it. I don't feel good. I don't feel, my brain doesn't feel good about it.
What is Hawks over Heat based on? What is the impulse or data point here? I
haven't been, the Heat have not given anyone a huge reason for them to be optimistic that there's like a big run coming here. I mean, they were the number 1 seed last year. It was like they were one shot away. You got to forget that. Yeah, they were the number 1 seed last year. They're the 7th seed this year. I think, the Lowry thing, I don't think he's reclaiming his starting spot. And if Gabe Vincent and Tyler Hero and Max Strus are all on the floor together to start games, which is the way they've been going recently, I got a lot of spots to pick at if I'm an opposing offense with talent. And the Hawks have talent. And the Heat have really defanged that talent by just blitzing the hell out of Trae Young, throwing different looks at him. Sometimes they'll drop on the side, sometimes they'll play zone. He just doesn't know what's coming. If he trusts his teammates and they make enough threes, I think they can win this game. And it goes against every bit of common sense I have, because you have the historic matchup. You have one team is tough as we know that, and the other team is just been mired in controversy all year and drama and all that. And Jimmy Butler to win a game feels like a good bet. Like he'll do the thing where he'll just be like, all right, I just have to get to the foul line 17 times in the second half? Like, I'll get to the foul line 17 times. My gut says this is going to be a really competitive game and the Hawks might win. On talent, I think they're
my gut is Jimmy Butler's going for like 35, 10 and 8 or something, and the Heat win.
I'm just saying everyone's penning. I already see the segments like, should the Celtics be scared of the Heat? Are the Celtics in trouble in the first round? I'm like, I'm not penciling in the Heat in the 7th seed right now. I know their offense has been playing better lately, but the Jimmy Butler matchup is a problem for Atlanta. I would watch on John Collins maybe starting on Jimmy Butler if they start the Max Strus lineup with Max Strus at the 4, because there's no one else really for John Collins to guard. I thought the Heat might start Caleb Martin because he's over Strus because he's guarded Trae pretty well, but we'll see. And Jimmy can guard DeJounte Murray too. He's guarded him really well. He can guard anybody. I don't know. My gut is smelling a little caca. Howard Beck, you wrote for GQ this week on voter fatigue. You mentioned it before. I read it. And you're going to be writing for them throughout the postseason, correct?
Yes, I will be covering the playoffs for GQ over the next few months. And then beyond that, we'll see.
Thank you, sir. Read everything Howard does at GQ. Listen to him whenever he talks, including on this podcast and in other places. Mr. Beck, I'm sorry I didn't greet you with a what up. I will do it next time. I'll see you soon, my friend.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Zach.
Poor guy, Tim MacMahon. You can't, there's no end to this for you. There's no end to the podcast appearances. There's no end to the TV appearances. There's no end to any of this in your life, because every week it's something different with the Dallas Mavericks. And since we have last talked about the Dallas Mavericks, I can't even bear to list all the things that have happened to them. They lost their protest.
Mm-hmm.
They lost a whole bunch of games.
Mm-hmm.
Then they won a really inspiring game to stay alive in the play-in race. Then
right after Luka's rallying cry, we will not shut it down as long as we have any hope. Go on.
Then they lost on purpose to keep or give themselves an 80% chance of keeping the top 10 protected pick that they owe the New York Knicks. In between all that, we don't need to rehash it, but Mark Cuban gave a long media session in which he tried to explain away the Jalen Brunson debacle in ways that really did not make sense, and I think conveniently obviated some interesting facts and timelines and all that. I think I used that word correctly. I don't care if I didn't. You know what I mean?
First time I've ever heard it, but that's a Dartmouth word. Go on.
I think it's actually maybe it's possible I used it wrong. And then the league announced that they were going to investigate the Dallas Mavericks for holding all their players out except for Luka in against the Chicago Bulls in their second to last game of the season. And Luka played a quarter in a minute because it was Slovenian night. Hope he didn't spend too much on your tickets, as I said before, to Slovenian night.
And he'd given the big rallying cry.
The big rallying cry.
Yes.
And so now they're under investigation. We could talk about whether we think that's fair. And then
tell you what, get the FBI involved. That's going to be a really difficult investigation to handle. I mean, wow. Who could tell what they're trying to do there?
We'll get there. And then Kyrie Irving skipped his exit interview. Okay.
I do want to clarify his exit interview with the media. I don't think he skipped out on the front office, as far as I know, or coaches. He just didn't talk to the media.
Okay. Pawns. And Luka, in his exit interview with the media, took issue with your reporting.
Oh, that's a first.
Even though, let's be clear what Tim MacMahon reported.
I tried to make sure everybody was. Well, Luka was mocking me, but go on.
You cannot overestimate the degree to which people will see and hear only what they want to see and hear, or in this case, what they don't want to see and hear. I don't know which it is. Right. You reported that the Mavericks, or some sources within the Mavericks,
correct,
have a fear that if things don't change, that Luka Doncic may begin the process of perhaps requesting a trade as early as the summer of 2024. You did not report that Luka Doncic and his agents, Bill Duffy, et cetera, have gotten together and begun to plot this out, because they have not done it, to my knowledge. All you did was say, this team feels the same emotion rationally that any team in its position currently would feel vis-a-vis Luka Doncic. Absolutely. If the Mavericks weren't worried about Luka Doncic requesting a trade at some point during the life of his contract, they'd
be complete doofuses.
Doofus is a great word. Nobody calls anybody doofuses anymore. I don't know if we should or not. I don't really know the origin of doofus, but I just like the way it sounds.
I should look it up. I'll look that up and obviate when we're done here. But yeah, right. I mean, honestly, to be clear, I didn't put this out there like, oh my gosh, what a revelation. This was, in the 13th, 14th paragraph of a, it was packed in the context of what an awful season it was. Here's what it can mean. Here's where the Mavs are. Here's the concerns moving forward. And like you said, this is common sense. Do you follow the NBA? Did you see what went down with Anthony Davis in New Orleans, with James Harden in Houston? Kevin Durant actually screwed up the timetable because he got out with 3.5 years left in Brooklyn. But summer 2024 is when Luka would have 2 years left on his contract, because we all know the player option, whether he can be ecstatic about staying in Dallas at that point or not, he's not picking up that player option because he's going to make a ton more money than that option is for that 5th year. So he's got 2024, he'll have 2 more years left. And if they have another miserable season next year, how couldn't he think about, man, dude, we're not any better off 6 years into my career than we were when they got me as a high lottery pick? Like, what are we doing here? How do we do?
Tick.
Yeah, that's all it is. And like, Zach, have we talked about this all year long? Yeah. Have honestly people within the Mavericks talked about it all year long?
We talked about it, you and I, since the second it became clear Jalen Brunson was going to New York. Whenever that was, and however you want to relitigate that, and I do not want to spend any time on this podcast relitigating all the shit that has gotten Dallas to this point, all the decisions, all the drip of talent out the door, all the talent that never came in the door because of draft and free agency decisions and mishaps, all that. The second Brunson was gone, the conversation went from the back burner, which is already a burner. Back burner is a burner. You can cook on the back burner up to the front burner. And it's been on the front burner ever since. And now the front burner is turned up a little bit. That's all.
Woo. Yeah, no, it's hot. It's hot. Look, and as we discussed yesterday with Luka, it's not like the Mavericks have never won. They went to a Western Conference Finals in the last year of his rookie deal. But then when the next step is not even a step back, they got knocked on their asses this year and ended up in the ditch. That's the only way to describe making a massive risk of a blockbuster trade mid-season and then tanking in the last couple of games to try to protect a lottery pick.
A trade neither of us liked, to be clear, at the time.
Right. I understood the desperation then. By the way, the desperation to make that trade is all part of this broader conversation that we're having. If they don't feel like, dude, how do we get a co-star? How do we get a co-star? Oh, God, we can't pass on a chance to get a co-star, even with all the risk. That trade was made in large part because of this pressure that comes with having Luka on the roster. And it's a blessing and a curse. Would you much rather have this pressure than not? Obviously, but it is pressure.
Can you take me through the whiplash of inspirational win against the Kings, everyone going all out, to Thunder beat the Jazz in a game that was, by the way, competitive for about 3 1/4 quarters, because the Thunder are not limping to the finish line, but like, it was not unreasonable. It would not have been unreasonable had Dallas not punted early to think, yeah, the Memphis B team, they might have a shot to beat the Thunder if the Thunder feel pressure in that last game. Like, that wouldn't have been a crazy outcome, even if Memphis sat Morant, sat Jackson, sat everybody. If you got Kenneth Lofton Jr., baby, you got a shot. And the Thunder are not blowing
G League Rookie of the Year.
Is it just as simple as the Thunder won that game and that was what they were waiting on? Like, can you just take me through how, and then they sit everybody but Luka, which is obviously then becomes clear that's for Slovenian night. So I get that, but can you add any clarity to me?
And I don't think it was just for Slovenian night, because again, if we're going to go through the whiplash, we've got to start with, there's this kind of, I'm going to call it a trial balloon that's sent up about, hey, the Mavs might tank this last week of the regular season. That talk starts getting out there on Monday. Luka, who very rarely talks after a home practice, talked Tuesday, and he had something he wanted to say. And that was, as long as there's a chance, I'm going to play. I wasn't part of that discussion. And they know not to come to me with that discussion. Like, I'm playing, even if there's a little chance, a slim chance. Okay. And then
if he doesn't play, who's going to yell at the referees? They're going to have an easy day of work.
Oh, I thought he might get teed up during that last little quarter that he played and just go ahead and serve a suspension, but he didn't. So you have that. And then, he talked a little bit more and talks about, he was like transparent as he is. Hey, no, there's not confidence. How could there be? They'd lost, he said 9 of 10. It was 7 of 8 at a time. And, the chemistry is just not the same this year. And that's when I said, well, how much you guys miss Brunson? Because everybody knows what Brunson meant to that team that was around him. And he just looked so pained, and he said a lot. Just kind of shaking his head. So then we go the next day. Mark Cuban, who has not been available to the media very often. This has been a pretty significant shift really over the last couple of years since Nico Harrison got hired. he makes a point to kind of stroll out and make himself available about 2.5 hours before tip. Talks to media for about 45 minutes. And his agenda was the Brunson blame, basically shifting it off him, all Rick Brunson's fault. We want to keep Kyrie, but then I think Cuban kind of put himself in a little bit when he wouldn't flat out say, hey, we're not going to get outbid, which he said about Brunson last year. It didn't end up being true. But
when are you too old for you to blame your own failures on your parents, or for people to blame things you do on your parents? I feel like the age of the statute of limitations passed on like being like, oh, Rick Brunson told Jalen what to do, and that's what happened.
Well, to be clear, Jalen's not blaming his dad. Jalen's happy.
Jalen is having a borderline All-NBA year for a 5th seed in the Eastern Conference that, by the way, I think is going to – well, we'll see where Randall is.
Well,
I think it's going to put up a competitive series.
I was going to say, I think that might be the best first-round series. It's going to be a fun one. And then, about Luka's long-term kind of optimism for the franchise, I thought Cuban really hit this one right on the money. Basically, I'm going to paraphrase, but he said, I think he wants to be here his whole career, but we've got to earn that. We've got to earn that. It is a direct quote.
So the fans need to listen, because he's telling them that they're worried. He's telling them.
He's stating the obvious. And it's a tough question to answer, because what are you can't say, oh my gosh, we're terrified, but you also can't say, dude, Luka's going to be here his whole career, because then Luka's like, oh, wow, you're taking me for granted. So, it's a tough question to answer. I'll acknowledge that, but I thought what he said is 100% accurate. Then they go out, they beat the Kings. Kyrie goes bonkers in the fourth quarter, scores 19 in the fourth quarter. And you know what? That might have ended up being, we'll see how things play out, but that might have ended up being Kyrie Irving's last moments wearing a Dallas Mavericks uniform, because Friday they made the decision to pull the plug on the season. And I was shocked. I'm not going to lie to you. I was shocked when I got the alert for the injury report Friday morning, because everybody was listed as, they were ready to go, guns ablaze, and they're going to play everybody. And as you mentioned, they'd lost the Jazz had lost the previous night to the Thunder. So that was, it was win or be eliminated. And they knew, hey, if OKC wins their finale, you're eliminated anyways. The percentages said this was the rational move for the Mavericks to make. You laid out the pick protections with New York. If you're top 10, 80% chance, you keep it. If you're not, it's like an 8-point-something% chance. They were tied with the Bulls for the 10th best odds. So losing to the Bulls is like a double whammy in the tank direction you're trying to go. The only reason I was shocked by all this was because Luka had been so firm and so adamant, and by his standards, really was a rallying cry. He even mentioned, I always say, you got to believe. Like I said it when we were down 2-0 against the Suns last year. You always got to believe when you got any chance.
69 Mets, baby.
There you go. And then obviously they lose those last two. Luka did come out for exit interviews, and I asked Luka, what changed from when you said that Tuesday to Friday? And he just said, I didn't like that decision. That's it. Were you involved in it? Did they discuss it with you? He's like, yeah, obviously. And basically just said, hey, we came to an agreement, and essentially they did something he didn't want to do. And what it comes down to is this. Obviously, the Mavericks are walking on eggshells with Luka. And that's not a criticism of him. We can talk about any team with any, once you get to a certain status as a superstar, franchises walk on eggshells with these guys. It's just the way it is. The decision ultimately was, hey, Luka might be pissed about this right now, but the only chance for his long-term happiness is for us to really make drastic progress building a roster around him. And dude, if we don't have a top 10 pick this year, oh boy. So they felt like essentially, Luka ultimately what he wants is as much talent around him as possible. And sorry that tanking's got to be part of that process, but they felt like that was the position they'd put themselves in.
And to be clear, the difference between 10th and 11th in the lottery order is as gargantuan as it gets. So currently, you just said
when you owe a top 10 protected pick, yes.
Yes. Currently, they have, as you said, a 79.8, 80% chance, we'll say, of being 10 or higher. Had they just went up in the standings / down in the lottery to 11th, they have a 90% chance of picking 11th or higher. I mean, that is as stark a percentage difference as you're going to get. It's why they did it. We all know why they did it. I had someone spitballing with me yesterday saying, the Mavs, it's rational, Zach. It's rational. I'm gonna give you a hot take here, Zach. The Mavs are closer to winning a title now than they were in the conference finals last season. And I said, they were fine. They were, by definition, like 8 wins away from winning the title last year. That's insane talk. That's insane talk. But it's, some people think that. But look, that's why they did it. We all know why they did it. And I will, if someone told you, Tim MacMahon, hey man, there's a 20% chance you're going to get struck by lightning today if you leave your house, but you really had something you wanted to do, like you had tickets to the Super Bowl or something like that. It's like 80% chance I can go watch the Super Bowl and sit in a suite. 20% chance I get struck by lightning. I'm guessing you're staying home.
Yeah. Plus, honestly, I don't want to sit in traffic anyway. So yeah, I'm definitely sitting at home.
My point is, I haven't gone back and researched it yet. Given the humiliation and the embarrassment that they suffered or inflicted upon themselves to get to this point, I don't know that there's been a team in the lottery. There's obviously been teams with hopes, right? Like the Bobcats way back when in the AD draft, they went in hoping, right? But everyone has hope,
right,
to leap up to number 1 or number 2. Everyone at the bottom has that every year. I don't know if there's been a team that's going to have the butt cheeks clenched as tightly out of fear of that 20% as the Dallas Mavericks. Whoever is their representative in the lottery room in May, I want to sit next to that person because I want to see the tension on their face, because 20% is non-trivial. It is non-trivial. And if they end up forking this pick over on top of all this, that is just an all-time moment. And I'm not saying, I don't know, I have no rooting interest. I'm just saying, like, people are acting as if they've kept the pick. 20% is not nothing. 20% is something.
And listen, people in Dallas, longtime Mavericks fans, know all too well how cruel lottery luck can be. The Mavericks have quite literally never moved up in the lottery. And there have been times when, like, they were awful. I think they had like the second best odds and moved down to 4 in the Shaq draft, for example. Even in the Luka draft, they tanked. Cuban paid $600,000 for blurting on Dr. J's podcast that they were tanking. And they end up with the 3rd best lottery odds. They got bumped down to 5th and had to give up the next year's first round pick to move back up to get him. The lottery has been a cruel bee to the Mavericks. And hey, maybe that means they're finally due some good luck. I'm not quite sure the way that they went about getting the 10th best odds is one to generate good karma. But moving down again would just be an absolute disaster.
Why do you think the league is investigating them, and do you think it's fair?
So I think that the league is investigating them primarily because they were so brazen about it, because it was so embarrassing for the league. Their pride and joys is playing, hey, the terrible teams might tank, but the teams are, we're going to have more teams that have a chance. It's going to prevent tanking. And then the Mavericks basically said, play-in? We don't want to play in. We want a freaking lottery pick. What are you talking about? Get us the hell out of this spot. Honestly, because Jason Kidd didn't use the word tank, but said a whole lot of words that can be boiled down to those 4 letters.
Basically said my bosses told me to do it. This thing that we're doing.
He called it an organizational decision, essentially to prioritize the long-term interest in roster building over the slim chance of making the play-in. Like, he was honest. So I think they're being investigated because it's the first rule of the tank club. You don't say you're tanking, right? And he said this was a Nico Harrison decision and a Mark Cuban decision. And was there an NBA team governor, as we call them now, that has been fined over the last 5 years for publicly admitting tanking? Oh, there is one. It's Mark Cuban. So there's history there as well. But listen, I'll say this. If you're going to say, well, because they tanked when they still had play-in chances, that's the difference. I've got a lot. I have a good relationship with a lot of people in the Utah Jazz organization. I'm here to tell you, you can look at the Jazz's injury reports and do your own math. And that's why this investigation thing, like, really, what are you investigating? You know what happened. What are you going to do about it? Something or nothing, like whatever the NBA decides is on them. But let's not act like you need to go hire freaking, the Watergate reporters to get to the bottom of this thing.
So there is a difference both in timing and in optics of a team with a chance with 1 day to go or 2 days to go, punting on that chance. But there's only a difference in timing and optics because the Jazz and the Blazers, who damn near signed you and me to play the last couple of games for them, there's only a difference because those two teams pulled the plug earlier for whatever reasons. Damian Lillard, Anthony Simons injury, they were smart enough to just, well, everyone's looking over there, they'll pull the plug. And so by the time you get to this high profile moment, the decision's already been made. You already forgot about it. I don't know. There is a difference between hanging around, and then pulling the plug at the last minute. There is a difference because they had more of a chance at the end, but only because they didn't pull the plug earlier. So I don't know that there's enough of a material difference. And I think you nailed it.
Also, is it worse to compete until the 81st game or just to pull the plug about like whatever the 60th game? Like, I'm sorry, what Portland Tank Blazers have done the last 2 years? Honestly, if I'm in the league office, I'm saying, hey, do we need to somehow come up with rules requiring a G League player to be to have certain statistical requirements to be signed to a 10-day? Because it's a 2-year-old trend. Portland has been one of the primary teams to do this, but they're intentionally signing G League players who aren't very good.
Well, and
playing them heavy minutes.
The NBA did not claim nor think that they had eradicated tanking with the play-in tournament and even just isolated the revised lottery odds that came before the play-in tournament. They didn't claim that, and I wrote a piece analyzing the revised lottery odds when they happened, and I said, this is designed to eradicate the ugliest, just we're going to win 15 games this season tanking, and I think it's been fairly successful at that. But I said in that piece, there are going to be teams who bail out with 20 games to go because now there's a big profitable difference between 9th and 5th. And Portland tanked their damn way all the way to 5th in the lottery order. And that's exactly what happened. And there is a difference between doing that with 20 games left and 1 game left. I just think it's a difference purely of timing and strategy. The effect is it looks worse, but I'm not sure it's worse enough to merit an investigation. And to your point, the reason they're being investigated is because they talked about it. Had they just not said anything, I think the NBA would probably have privately called them and said, look, man, this sucks. You're spitting in the face of the play-in. And they would say, look what the Blazers and the Jazz did. And that would be the end of it. Right. But they talked about it.
It looks worse, but what's worse for the integrity of the league? A team that is tanking for months or a team that's tanking for days? Neither is great. And the NBA has a massive tanking problem. I would challenge Adam Silver and other people in the league office to figure out a way to deal with it. Our colleague Tim Bontemps actually has a very interesting scenario. I suggest you have him on at some point and run through it.
He never comes on. You always tell he's too busy. He never comes on. He's too busy with the Hoop Collective. I ask him, I recording this, I'm recording that. I can't do it. I said, all right.
Well, everybody's not as nice as I am. I tell you that.
I like the wheel that Mike. I don't want to do the whole draft thing. My thing with the draft
that's a nice. At some point, let's have a summer conversation about that during slower times.
My thing with the draft and changing the draft and equalizing the draft and eliminating the lottery and just let the best team pick for whatever it is you have to. Those are all abolishing the draft, having it be free agency. Those are all interesting ideas that are worthy of interrogation. You just have to ask yourself this question. Are you comfortable with the best team getting Victor Wembanyama? Are you comfortable with the team with the Warriors getting Scoot Henderson? Or if you are, then by all means advocate for the most dramatic changes possible. But a lot of those changes are going to crack open the door to the juggernaut just got the best guy. And if you're okay with that, that's fine. If that makes you a little worried because of talent imbalance and all that, that's a different thing. The other thing with the Mavs is this. There was a lot of Twitter clowning. And again, I was active on NBA Twitter, so I rarely am.
Ooh.
A lot of people clowning the Wizards. And here's hashtag #SoWizards, another 35-win season or whatever it is. And Tommy Shepard did his media today, and I saw a quote about how he was disgusted and disappointed to be 35 and whatever he was. And everyone's response was, what kind of team did you think you built, man? It's the same goddamn team every year. You're a play-in or bust every year. And I don't know that you can mock the Wizards for being this mediocrity that seems satisfied with its own mediocrity and urge them to pick a direction by which you're really saying get worse, because the Wizards don't have the capability and assets right now to get better. And then tisk the Mavs for protecting their own future. Now, I understand the circumstances are different. Timing's different. Their paths here are different. The Mavs had an actual base of accomplishments last year in the conference finals that the Wizards can't. So I get it's all different. I'm just saying, if you're mocking the Wizards and tisking the Mavericks, there's a middle ground where you can do both of those things, but it's pretty narrow.
So again, I think that what the Mavericks did was embarrassing, and you can criticize it, but you have to understand the logic. The where you really blast the Mavericks is, dude, you've got a MVP caliber superstar who turned 24 years old during this season, and you were that bad after you traded for another all-star mid-season, after you made a massive risk of a win now deal. You were that bad, so where tanking at the end of the season made sense. That's the problem.
I can't wait till we can talk about a different team than the Mavericks.
I'm heading to Memphis this weekend.
We can talk about the Grizzlies, because I don't want to talk about the Rockets either. God bless Steven Silas. Didn't work out. That's over.
Didn't have a chance, man. Great guy. We have no idea how good of a coach he is because he never had a chance.
What did Tillman Fertitta say at Mardi Gras? We're praying for Victor?
It was more like this. Pray for Victor.
Well,
a cup in hand.
I don't know. The lottery gods are fickle. They I don't know if they respect that sort of blatant pandering. We'll see. We'll see how they treat the Mavericks.
The lottery gods might like Mardi Gras. They might like to party.
I still think the basketball gods, the lottery gods, all the gods. I just think Wembanyama is going to San Antonio. I've said that I sound like a moron. I'm in the drawing room every year. I see what it is. My gut says the Spurs are getting Wembanyama.
Victor comes to Texas, I'm going to have a chit chat with bosses as far as exactly what my life looks like. I'll tell you that, Zach.
But I don't, it's funny. I don't know if in the drawing room, I don't know what happens if you have a bathroom emergency, if you're allowed to leave the drawing room. But man, if the Mavs come up 11, 12, 13, 14, who's ever in there for the Mavs, that person might want to vomit somewhere. I'm going to have my eyes on that person.
A bathroom emergency? I would think you'd probably want to handle your business before heading into the room.
You do, but I'm saying emergencies happen. You got to give up your phone. You got to give up you can't leave. It's like Fort Knox in there. I don't know what happens.
Maybe.
Right.
I don't know.
Tim MacMahon.
I don't want to analyze that too much.
We'll talk about some basketball soon. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you, brother. Adios, amigos.